Hi, I'm Eric Bolling in for Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching this O'Reilly Factor Election 2016 special. We're going to go right to our top story, the battle for the Supreme Court. The sudden death of Justice Antonin Scalia, creating one of the biggest political fights in years over whether President Obama should nominate Scalia's replacement or leave it to the next president. President Obama is leaving little doubt about where he stands.
I plan to fulfill my constitutional responsibilities to nominate a successor in due time. There will be plenty of time for me to do so and for the Senate to fulfill its responsibility to give that person a fair hearing and a timely vote.
Meanwhile, the Republican presidential candidates are wasting little time drawing their own lines in the sand.
I think it's up to Mitch McConnell and everybody else to stop it. It's called delay, delay, delay.
We are one justice away from a Supreme Court that would undermine the religious liberty of millions of Americans. And the stakes of this election for this year, for the Senate needs to stand strong and say, we're not going to give up the U.S. Supreme Court for a generation by allowing Barack Obama to make one more liberal appointee.
Mitch McConnell's already made it very clear that we're not going to move forward until there's an election. And I think that's the right decision. The court can function with 8 justices. In the last year, within the last few months of the president's term, we should not be appointing Supreme Court justices.
Joining us now from Washington with reaction, Fox News contributor Mary Catherine Ham, and with me in studio, Juan Williams, my co-host of the 5-1. Let's say there are 4 questions. Will he, should he nominate? Will they, should they delay? Let's start with will he and should he?
He should. That's his responsibility as President of the United States. That's what the Constitution says, that he should nominate, and the Senate should advise and consent, in this case, have hearings and have a vote.
Oh, he should, so will he now?
Yes, and he will. He said it. That's not me. Yeah.
Mary Catherine, now let's take the Senate. Will they and should they go ahead and delay this nomination, whomever it may be?
Look, it's perfectly within the rights of the president to say, here's who I would like, and it's perfectly within the rights of the Senate to say, yeah, we'll see what we can do about that. That's the process, and it's far from standard operating procedure to name somebody during an election year who will fundamentally change the ideological balance of the court when we've already started voting for a new president. This process has begun already. So I do think there's plenty of precedent to say, hey, we're going to stop, including, by the way, the Democrats' own pattern of aggressing when it comes to judicial nominees, borking, which is the verb for personally assailing a nominee, nuking the filibuster when it suited them, and using the judicial filibuster when it suited them under Bush. There's plenty of precedent here for going hard on this issue and for sticking to their guns.
And sticking to the American, let's say, on you, the politics, what will it be perceived? In other words, people have accused the Republicans of being obstructionists in the past. If they do it one way, they can be clearly seen as obstructionists, that they say, we're not even going to hear this. But what about if they just listen and they say, okay, let's talk about this nominee and let's draw this out a little bit?
I think listening is fine. Frankly, they did a fine job with Sotomayor and Kagan. Some argued for a filibuster. I argued against it. They ended up doing that very smoothly with plenty of votes. This is a different situation in a different year. There's a Republican Senate for a reason, because they won a bunch of seats because a bunch of people were mad at President Obama. So there's plenty of backup from the voters to say, hey, let's chill and look at this for a minute.
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason why you should have this go forward. Because guess what? There are lots of people who voted for President Obama twice to be president for 8 years, not 7 years and a few months, but 8 years. And under the terms of that vote, the people have spoken about who is to nominate a Supreme Court justice. And Mary Catherine, let me say, I don't agree with what you just said about Democrats being aggressive in terms of handling nominees. I recall not only was Justice Kennedy approved in the last year under President Reagan, but I think there have been 19 Supreme Court justices approved in the last year. And don't forget, Democrats had the majority in the Senate when President Bush was there, and they approved 2 conservative nominees for President Bush.
Let me just point out, let's just clear this up, Juan, that Kennedy was approved during the election year, but he was nominated in the year prior.
It was very close. It was a matter of a few weeks.
Okay, but there is a distinction there. Hold on.
And here's the thing. Let's also talk about President Obama. And when he was a senator, he had a standard, and that was for 60 votes for Justice Alito. So he maybe have to live by the standard he set. and he's not going to like it, but that may be where this goes. This is how it works. There's a high threshold. This is a serious matter.
So let's talk about President Obama here a little bit, about the hypocrisy of what he's doing. Mary Catherine Ham points out that he voted to get a 60-vote threshold for Alito. Now I guess he's suggesting he still isn't going to get the vote anyway.
There never has been a 60.
Here's my question for you, though, Juan. The president says he has a constitutional responsibility, yet he spent the better part of 7 years going around the Constitution on the executive order, on immigration, on the big one, some would say on Obamacare.
This is so fascinating to me. You have people who used executive orders far more than President Obama, including President Bush, George W. Bush, President Clinton, President Reagan, and yet you keep coming back to this.
Because
I think this is just like...
Because those presidents used it for things like declaring national holidays or declaring the day of this and whatnot. Not any president, at least in recent memory, has used executive order to change policies dramatically as President Obama has.
Because we live in such politically polarized times, and we have, and I think this is another example of it. Every time the president tries to do something, Republicans obstruct, and then when he responds, you say, oh, this guy's a despot. He's a king.
Juan, he uses executive power to turn his feelings into law at any turn. He routinely says he spurns Congress, and then he does nothing to cultivate that relationship, and then he says, hey, I'm going to come to you for a solid at this point late in my lame duck career. No, that's not how it works.
Well,
you actually do have to cultivate that.
I don't know who spurns who, Mary Catherine, because it seems to me that it was Mitch McConnell who's leading the obstruction on this justice.
That's why they approved the first two choices for him.
Governing America, forget that I'm elected to be the Senate Majority Leader. My job is to stop Obama from having a second term. Does that sound like someone who's serious?
Where'd Kagan and Sotomayor come from then?
They were voted by a majority of the Senate, right?
Yeah.
So what's to stop this now?
Because we're in a different political climate, and it is not standard operating procedure to take somebody on in an election year.
The only thing different is the politics, and Republicans don't want to see the court led by a liberal majority.
That's exactly right. There's nothing wrong with that because the American people have suggested that they like Republicans in charge of the Senate, and now they're in charge of it.
And who elected President Obama? The liberals then, huh? Or the independents?
That was 2 years before.
But stay on this for 1 second, guys. I got to wrap in about a minute or so. Very quickly around the horn. Juan, what would be bad with a 4-4 Supreme Court? Maybe for a year until
you know what the example going around town today is? Well, what if you have another Bush versus Gore in the election? Why not expect that your Supreme Court should function, your Senate should function, and your president should function and get it done?
Mayor Catherine, what about a 4-4 tie until the next president comes in sworn in?
There's plenty of precedent for that as well. And if the president was interested in functioning, he could function on Obamacare in the normal process. He could function on executive orders on immigration on the normal process and go to Congress, and he doesn't do that.
All right, we got to leave it right there. Juan and Mary Catherine, great debate. Thank you very much.